The following was recorded in front of a live studio audience at the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. This is the United Podcast Network.
The following program is closed captioned for the thinking impaired.
By tomorrow, I will rule the world!
You think he's gone? He's not gone. That's the whole point. He's never gone.
Is this some radical new therapy?
You see?
Well, I must have not been paying attention when you were just talking to me. Do you think that you could repeat the question and I listen more attentively? There must have been something in all of that nothing that wasn't quite so easy to see.
Alrighty.
And I must have missed something.
Hey, how you guys doing? Tom Duggan here on the Paying Attention podcast, high atop the Two Guys Smoke Shop in Salem, New Hampshire, at the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. And we want to welcome you into the show today. No Paul today because we have a debate. Hopefully this is going to be a spirited debate. And the reason I wanted to do this particular debate first is because, as a news guy, I have to pay attention to all of the races that are on the ballot. And there's a lot of races down ballot, so to speak, that a lot of people don't pay attention to. Paying attention, right? That's the name of the show. And so there's a lot of people who don't pay attention to those races at the bottom. And some of those races are more important than the races near the top of the ballot, like state rep, state senate. And today we have such a race. It's the governor's council. Most people don't know what the governor's council is, what they do, why they're important, why we need them, who's your governor's council, who's running against them for governor's council. So I thought if nothing else, we could educate people today. For those of you who are going to be voting, we want to make sure that, you're going to probably be up on the governor's race and maybe your local state reps, but you're probably not going to be up on this race. And so I thought we could use this show to educate people about a very, I think, critical board, one of the most critical boards in government, and that is the Governor's Council. So what I'm going to do is, those of you who have, I know Eileen has been on a debate before, and I think Rich has probably done one with me too when I was on radio. It's going to be the same format. I'm not going to time anybody's answers. I'm just going to ask you to be respectful of each other, and if I think one person's dominating time, I'll slow you down and I'll give somebody else time that I think if they're not getting enough time. What I'd really like you guys to do after you introduce yourselves is I'd like you, when I throw out a question, I'd like you to talk to each other on what you agree and what you disagree on. Sometimes we find out more about candidates by what they agree on than what they disagree on, and the way most debates are structured, it's usually for the conflict. What do you guys disagree about? And so I want to kind of do a little bit of both. If there's something that I don't bring up that you guys would like to bring up, feel free to bring it up. Let me know. We can spend a couple of minutes on it if there's a specific topic that I'm not bringing up or your colleagues aren't bringing up. So why don't we start? We'll start to my far left. Why don't you just introduce yourself, take a few minutes to introduce yourself, tell people why you're running for Governor's Council, and maybe even explain a little bit what the Governor's Council is.
Sure. So my name is Marc Mercier. I'm from Boxford.
Can you please pull that mic really close to you?
Sure. Yeah. Really close.
You're from Boxford?
I'm from Boxford.
You got a great police chief in Boxford.
Yeah.
Jim Ryder's a good guy.
Ryder's a good guy. And so I've been there in Boxford 20 years. I originally grew up in Malden, but when I got married, my wife lived in Boxford. We moved to Boxford. So that's where she was from. So the Governor's Council is a panel of people who are selected by the voters to act as a check on the authority of the governor in appointing judges in the state. So there's a very involved process for determining who should be a nominee for judge, and the governor ultimately puts that person up for potential judgeship. And this council provides the final word on whether or not they get appointed. They provide advice and consent to the governor on the appointment, I guess. There's not a lot of advisory going on beforehand from this council. I don't know if in the past, historically, they did, but it doesn't seem like there is now. The governor has his own, he or she has their own group of people that they work with for screening candidates. And candidates come from a joint bar committee of attorneys in Massachusetts, and they receive the applications, they do the background screens, they look into whether the person's qualified, and then they give a recommendation to the governor. And then the governor's group sorts through who they wish to bring forward, and then the council has the final say. So that's the background. Should I give my background as well?
Yeah, just give us a little bit about who you are.
Okay. So I'm running for governor's council because I think I'm the most qualified person to do that. And I've been a litigation consultant for 16 years. I've worked for some of the largest consulting firms in the world. I work with top litigators at most of the large law firms that are in Boston. And so I bring that perspective to it. Thereby, I think I'm the most qualified out of the three that are running right now. And I also am running on a third-party ticket. I'm running as a Libertarian, so I'm not a...
you're one of those pesky Libertarians.
Democrat or Republican. Maybe not pesky, but...
All right, okay. Fair enough.
And so I think that, serving in that role as a check on the authority of the governor, it's very important to have independent-minded people there. And so being not party affiliated one way or the other, it doesn't matter which governor wins, which candidate for governor wins. I will be able to serve in that capacity until a Libertarian wins the governorship, I guess. As an objective, not as a partisan.
Right.
And then third, I think a lot of people think you should just get away from this governor's council as a concept. I don't. I think it's very important, but they complain that it's sort of a waste.
That was going to be one of my questions, so I'm glad you touched on it.
And so for me, I think one way that I remediate that problem or alleviate that problem is I've taken a pledge to accept no salary if I'm elected to
What
this
is the
position.
salary for the governor's counselor?
Eileen? I think it's around...
It's your question. You got to answer it.
I think it's around $40,000.
Well, he's planning on not taking it, so it doesn't matter to him, I guess, right?
Yeah, and I think it's around $40,000 for salary. I'm not confident exactly what that number is.
Right.
So I, as part of my proposal, I will refuse that salary if elected.
All right. Eileen Duff, you are the current governor's counsel. I've been watching you now for quite a few years. How long have you been on, like 6 years, 8 years?
6 years.
6 years. I've been watching you.
Every 2 years we run.
I like a lot of what you've done. I don't like some of what you've done, but I think we've always been civil in our disagreements, right?
We have, as one should be.
So why don't you explain to people who you are, what the governor's council does? Maybe you can touch on some things the governor's council does that Marc hasn't talked about.
Sure. My name's Eileen Duff. I'm running for re-election. I currently live on Cape Ann.
Can you just pull that mic just a little closer?
Can you hear?
There you go. Better.
Better.
Yes,
Better. So I currently live on Cape Ann in Gloucester. I grew up on the North Shore. My background is in public policy. Spent I don't know if I can say anymore at this age, but I spent a good part of my career working in Washington, mostly in telecommunications, intellectual property. I worked on writing the telecom bill at the FCC with an FCC commissioner. Worked on both sides of the aisle there. I actually worked for Republican when I was in D.C., even though I was a Clinton appointee. I have a great reputation for working across the aisle, which I think you're pretty aware of.
I can attest to that.
And the Governor's Council, although we are elected by political party, for the most part is a pretty impartial body. But we can talk about that because I'm sure you're going to have more questions on that later.
Marc's shaking his head no, so we're going to get to that in the follow-ups.
Ed, hey, listen, he can have his opinion. What was the other thing?
Well, what are some of the other things the Governor's Council does?
So we're the final check and balance on the governor for the judicial appointments, for the parole board, for the clerk magistrates. We sign off on all the Treasury warrants. Which
is like the bills.
Which means that people get paid.
Right.
Which means the money gets processed through the state.
So you're actually also a check and balance on making sure that the money's being spent the way it's supposed to be spent.
No, we're not. And that's a misunderstanding of it.
Well, I'm glad I asked.
It really is, I can honestly say, as far as that goes from the comptroller's office, that's where it comes from, that pretty much is a rubber stamp.
Okay.
And if you want to talk about that in more detail, I'd be happy to. But that is one part of the job that really pretty much is a rubber stamp. And I challenge anyone anywhere to tell me differently. We also sign off on all the notary publics
Okay. Well,
So-
when I put in my notary public
which-
application, I'll make sure to call you first.
Well, I don't know that I'm going to help you, but I'm going to sign. I'm going to sign the letter.
All right. Okay. All right. Rich Baker, you're a Republican. You've been on the show a bunch of times. Not this show, but when I was doing radio, this is an extension of our radio show. And you've run for this job once before. So why don't you tell people who you are and why you're running again?
Sure. I'm Rich Baker. I'm running again because I did so well last time. I did 4% better than Donald Trump in this district. And
That's not hard to do, though. This is Massachusetts, after all, right?
yeah, but
And my cat got more votes than Donald Trump in Lawrence last time. I don't even have a cat.
But it just shows that this position is available, and without Eileen having Hillary's coattails this time, we should be able to take the seat. So it's a very winnable seat, and that's why I'm running. As you said, I'm from West Newbury, and I'm currently the chairman of the West Newbury Board of Assessors. So we're the ones that make sure the taxes are fair in the town of West Newbury, that everyone pays their fair share, and that we allocate the burden of the town budget properly amongst the people. I'm also president of New England Intellectual Property, which it's a small consulting firm. I help inventors get patents and make money on their patents. And where Marc's a litigation consultant, I am not an attorney, so I can't be do patent litigation, but I can manage patent litigation. And I have for a number of my clients that and companies I've worked for. I've been an expert witness. I'm sure, Marc, you've done that a couple of times as well. I do brokering of patents, licensing of patents. So I do quite a bit with the patent system, which means I'm appearing for patent examiners, the patent appeal board, filing briefs, and I've appeared a number of times in federal courts. And in the federal courts, I see some of the best judges in the country.
You've never been convicted, though?
No, I have never been convicted. That was the primary.
Is that a disqualifier?
That's good. That's good. No, just to be full disclosure. We just want transparency here.
Mm-hmm. So I know what a good judge is, having managed litigation, having seen what their rulings are, and I want to make sure Massachusetts gets nothing but the best judges for dealing with cases that come before them. Any citizen that appears before a judge, that's probably the most important day of their lives. Something has gone wrong, and all of a sudden they need the judiciary to settle a dispute they have, or to address something they've done wrong. And for that particular citizen, they're counting on that judge to be fair, impartial, to follow the rule of law. And our job as governor's counselors is to make sure that the judiciary in Massachusetts has nothing but the best judicial minds in there, people that will follow the rule of law and make sure that they issue fair decisions.
So I think my first question is, because one of my pet peeves as somebody who's somewhat of a constitutionalist, is this notion of a living, breathing document. We hear this on the news all the time. Most people at home, some people at home following may not understand that. There are two schools of thought on this. One is that the Constitution, the Scalia model, which I would follow, the Constitution says what it means what it says. It's not open to interpretation. It doesn't change with the times. If you want to change it, you use the mechanism within the Constitution and you have it amended. Then there's the philosophy that the Constitution is a living, breathing document that changes with the times, because the guys who wrote it was 200 and something years ago, and they couldn't have foreseen everything. So I just wanted each of you to just take a few minutes, talk to each other about what you agree with and disagree with on this, as to whether or not you think the Constitution, not just the United States Constitution, but the state Constitution that you're going to be following, does it mean what it says and says what it means, or is it a living, breathing document? And I'll let anybody who wants to go first. Eileen. No, I'm sorry.
No, you can. Yeah, well, because you know my thought on this.
I already know her answer. That's why I called her first.
He does, and that's perfectly fine. Although I slightly disagree with something that you said. And I'll tell you what. I believe that it's more of a living document, in that the amendments that we have and that we're enabled to have through the correct process are what prove that to be so. I also would say, from being a great admirer of Judge Scalia's, believe it or not.
Really?
Oh yeah. I read a lot of. I read
10 more
a
points
lot
for
of the-
Eileen.
I read a lot.
Yes,
Hey, listen.
I'll give you points for that.
Here's the thing. I don't agree with a lot of this stuff, and you and I know this. I may not agree with how he comes to his conclusions, but the man was a beautiful writer and a great jurist. And I think one of the things that always surprises people, and it really shocked Jen Casey when she learned this, is how close friends he was with Ruth Gator Ginsburg.
Right.
Oh, absolutely.
And
They were
how-
best friends.
How they spent so much time together.
Right.
But that's on the judicial mind. And I would say I beg to differ a little bit on Scalia being as strict a constitutionalist as we take him to be. But it doesn't really matter anymore, does it? The man's
So
not
when
with
we
us,
say
so-
a living, breathing document, most people mean that, like, abortion's not in the Constitution. Gay marriage is not in the Constitution.
Right.
That should go back to the states if you're an originalist like me. Then there are people who are believe it's a living, breathing document, that they believe that you can kind of change it with the times, that, you know, the culture has changed, the times has changed, and rather than doing an amendment, they just send it to the court, and the court finds this new right in the Constitution. Yes, no?
Again, I'd have to really think more about that, but I'm not sure I would say they find a new right, although I can understand how you would say, how you'd come to that conclusion. I agree that there are issues today that they weren't faced with, yet some of them were actually thought of, maybe not in the context, for example, gay marriage. Now, they may not have thought of gay marriage in the context of two single-sex people being married together, but the Constitution in the Founding Fathers, I mean, that's why we have civil marriage. I mean, that was one of the main reasons they left Europe, was over marriage. So we didn't have religious marriage. And in the Constitution, it's very, very clear that marriage is a civil law, not a religious law. Religions have any right to do whatever they want within their churches and acknowledge or not acknowledge whatever their belief system is.
You guys going to let her get away with all this? Or,
Well, I mean,
I'll let her have as much rope as she wants.
you go right ahead. No, join in. I mean, it's.
I don't necessarily disagree, but I'm pretty sure you guys disagree, so I'm just trying to get a little debate going here.
You already know that. Well, go ahead. I don't care.
Eileen and I debate this stuff all the time.
We
so that's
debated
why.
all the stuff, and
she's still wrong, but I love her anyway.
But that's all right, because part of the thing is the more discussions you have with people that you don't agree with, if you're really listening, you're going to learn. And that's where sometimes the change comes about. Now, we know, I would say, as a country, we've gotten a little bit too far away from that.
Yes, we have.
Which is really unfortunate. I think a great example on the councils, we only have one sitting Republican councilor right now, Jen Casey. And Jen and I, and it's kind of a joke, is that in almost every single way we are as opposite as can be. I'm this short little squatty person. She's this tall, attractive blonde.
And you haven't introduced her to me yet?
Yeah, she's married. Sorry, Tom.
I don't think that's ever mattered.
It will matter.
At least to me, anyway.
But are
Yeah.
you different in substantive
It'll-
ways?
But yeah, exactly. I mean, we have really, really different views on a whole bunch of things. But there's a whole bunch of things that we really agree upon that don't always come out in hearings and things. And I would tell anybody, if you call Jen Casey and you ask her who is the person that will support you the most on the council, who will have your back the most, I bet you $100 she'll say me.
But how is that possible?
I think I'll
if
take that
you
back.
have diametrically opposed views.
Just because we don't agree with each other doesn't mean I wouldn't support her on an issue. Because there's not a, it's,
I don't understand that at all. I mean,
because there's no one size fits all. It's not a cookie cutter. It's not like I'm voting for you because you're this or I'm voting for you because you're that. That's not how it works.
Mark,
That's not how life
Mark,
works.
can you weigh in
but-
on the living, breathing document stuff?
Yeah, go back. Get his.
Yeah, sure.
Go
well,
to that.
I think one
because
thing
that's an important issue for you, and,
Yeah, it
and
is.
I understand.
I think it's
why.
a big important issue for most people who on both sides who care about the Constitution.
Well, I think.
Well, you got to know what the rules are.
Right.
And
Well,
you can't be changing the rules and saying, "Oh, we're just going to reinterpret the rules." That's ridiculous. That's anarchy.
Yeah, the important thing that Scalia focused on was his interpretation, or the way that he said that the Constitution should be interpreted, was based upon the understanding at the time, right? And so that's sort of where this split is among the people that say it's living, breathing, and people that say you should adhere to it strictly. Because you could only end up with an agreement among people in a given society, which is what the Constitution is. It's an agreement on how they're going to run their government. You can only do it based upon their understanding at the time. Things that are available or issues that arise nowadays weren't considered as part of that, part of the construction of the Constitution. But it shouldn't matter, right? Over time, society, if there's something in the Constitution, like the legality of slavery, right? At one point in time, if there's a point at which the society determines that the law is not aligned with what their views of society should be, then they amend the Constitution. Right. And that's what the part that Eileen spoke about, that it's the proper process for changing. And so then, a lot of the people that say that the Constitution is living, breathing, what they actually mean is that the judges should be the ones to make the determinations about how we should change it. And that's not what
I'm always hearing people say that in fact, Robert said it the other day, almost fell off my chair, when he said that their job is to interpret the Constitution. I'm like, no. Your job is to interpret the law and apply the Constitution. That's what you're supposed to do. Yeah. But I'm not on the Supreme Court. What do I know?
The Constitution is supposed to be a fixed standard for the way that society interacts with each other.
Right.
And it's supposed to be applicable to the government. It's not supposed to be applicable to, like right now there's a proposal in Massachusetts to form a board that would be designed, it's very convoluted, but form a board that would be designed to amend the Constitution for the purpose of reversing Citizens United case, right?
Yeah, question 3. We should all be voting no on that.
No, it's question 2.
Oh, I thought it was 3. Okay.
Oh, it's 2.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that is them attempting to control the people via the Constitution, right? They're trying to control the way that people have free speech under the Constitution. Well, the very purpose of the Constitution is to restrict government's ability to influence that. And the First Amendment says you shall not, as a government, control people's freedom of speech. Well, they're attempting to insert into the Constitution control over people's free speech.
Eileen, you're going to let him get away with that?
Which is the opposite of what the Constitution's supposed to be for.
The Constitution is a great policy document. It should be timeless, and for the most part it is. It has lasted for 200 years with a couple of minor amendments. You've got the amendment process when you find situations that you need to add additional policy, but you get down into the details, that's your laws. But your problem when you've got, as Tom was talking about, the living document judges, then you get a totally different rule in Lawrence District Court than you would in Newburyport District Court. And the purpose of the law is to set a standard across all courts that everybody, and if you have certain judges that put a lot of their personal feelings in, you wind up spending most of your time on venue arguments, on whether, okay, this case should be brought in Lawrence, no, it should be brought in Newburyport, and both sides know the judge knows.
To get the result they want.
Right.
Yeah, that goes on a lot.
That's not what we want for justice.
What you're referring to is judge shopping.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Is that what you're referring to?
Forum shopping. It's done all the time.
So what is the... give me an example of when this has happened that you know about.
Sure. In patent law, Eastern District of Texas has been known for years.
In our district. Give me an example in our district.
Judge Feely down in
you walked right into that one.
In Salem. Every defense attorney in Essex County knows that you keep appealing and you keep procedurally maneuvering around until you get in charge of Judge Feely, and then your defendant gets to walk. That's been in the press for 2 years now.
Yeah, I think that's an oversimplification.
It is,
but and I understand that for political purposes, people make oversimplified arguments. There is probably a lot of cases in which Judge Feely did his job properly.
Oh, Judge Feely was a prosecutor for 17 years. He had a great reputation. Just the last couple of years, he's
Maybe
yeah.
he,
I mean, there's
happened.
specific, and this
maybe
is
he
a
fell
good
in love.
example.
Maybe he fell in love.
But
Maybe now he just sees the world a different way.
But this is a good example off Rich's, the point Rich was trying to make, that laws need to be applied universally among all the people, right? In a very specific decision about that heroin dealer, where the defense counsel asked for a lowering of bail, or that this person should receive bail, because if they were convicted, or the sentence was more strict, that would impact their status here as an immigrant, right?
Right.
Well, you're not supposed to hand out a lesser of a sentence because of individual person's, the impact on that individual person. You're supposed to hold to a universal standard for all people. So if that activity is illegal, which is another whole debate, people have to know in advance that if they are charged with those crimes, they will face a certain, somewhat standard penalty for that.
No matter which judge they're in front.
Now, both of you guys were shaking your head when Eileen was talking. You were both shaking your head when she said you were saying no. You were saying no when she said that the Governor's Council is mostly nonpartisan. You both really didn't seem to like that answer. So I'm going to give you guys a chance to beat up on her, and then I'm going to give her a chance to defend herself.
Go for it.
Whichever one you guys want to go
small
first.
and I'm a middle child. I can take it.
Well, I'm the big brother. I'm the oldest of 7. So.
If you go and attend one of these meetings, or even just watch it on YouTube, the amount of political grandstanding that goes on has virtually nothing to do with the nominee that is appearing before them, whether or not they're qualified for the position. It's shocking. I mean, nationally, people saw a lot of it in the Kavanaugh hearings, right? I don't know anybody that wasn't watching that. If you thought that there was a lot of political bickering going on there, it is very similar in the Governor's Council hearings. People use it to advance their own personal agendas, their own political agendas, giving speeches. I mean, they're supposed to be interviewing a candidate for this position, and they're just giving speeches about things that are important to them, or certain ones. I won't name anybody. Nobody here at this time, but other counselors go on and on about their personal experiences in this situation or that situation, and it's a lot of a waste of people's time, I think. So I mean, the bickering that goes on there over the most inane things.
Rich, you haven't had a lot of time. Do you want to address this? Is the Governor's Council a more partisan board than Eileen was saying that it was? Or
Absolutely.
Okay.
From talking to other governor's counselors, it's definitely partisan. You look at some of Eileen's statements in the press, and she'll go after the governor, or try to go after the governor for this and that, and it's purely political. But as Marc is saying, and Marc is spot on, our job is to interview a judge, and we are to try to discern what's in the judge's heart, why they're there. Are they there to put another check mark on their resume, or are they there because they want to serve the community? What are they going to be like as a judge? That's the important part of these Governor's Council meetings, not what somebody's personal opinion is, not what policy should or shouldn't be. If the Governor's Councilors are interested in policy, they shouldn't be on the council. They should be running for state rep or state senate. We've got much more of a ministerial job where we're interviewing and trying to figure out the best judges for Massachusetts.
Do both of you agree, before I go to Eileen, do both of you agree that Eileen is more partisan?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
No. They're all. I mean, there's huge partisans. I mean, I wrote an article on this. I think it was published by The Sun.
Not in the Valley Patriot, by the way.
No, I don't think it was. I don't think it
Big
was.
mistake.
I don't think it was. I had to shop them around. I sent you one. I did send you one when I
minus
first
1
ran.
point.
No. I try to get them all out there. But you took me off track of what I was going to say. Oh, but the two most non-partisans that I observe in there is Councilor Hurley
Yeah.
And how do you say her last name? The one that you said was diametrically opposed. Casey.
Jen
Casey?
Yeah. Those two, I've never seen. A lot of the grandstanding that goes on.
All right, so there's been
some of the others, and I'm not going to.
I was more interested in whether or not you thought
fingers,
Eileen
but-
was partisan, because my question now goes back to Eileen, because now she's got a chance to defend herself.
Oh, I have an example.
Oh,
I
go
could
ahead.
give.
Go right ahead.
During the appointment of one judge who happened to be a gay judge, I wouldn't have known or had watched the proceedings or anything, but she raised the issue. She said to him, "Well, now I think you really have an additional responsibility towards gay people in the community because you're a gay judge and you should, I don't know what she expected him to do. In my view, you don't treat anybody differently no matter what their political, personal, professional orientations, whatever are. But she seemed to suggest that there was some additional duty on this gentleman.
Because he was gay.
Because he was gay, that he would, I don't know, support the gay community more in his courtroom than other judges would.
You're saying Eileen did that?
Yes.
Right. And then there's Judge Reardon that Eileen went after because he's Roman Catholic. And that was 2016.
I didn't go after him because he was Roman Catholic.
Yes, you did. You look at that line of questioning,
Richard,
and you took him up.
Run your mouth. Go ahead. keep talking,
it's a
because the
little-
more you talk, it's better for me.
Again, I think it's an oversimplification. She did ask him.
It's
I was hoping these two could actually get into it, because you guys seem to be really getting into it now.
She did ask him what his religious affiliation was, which probably was just an inappropriate.
It was inappropriate.
Comment. But
You're absolutely right.
But,
it was inappropriate.
I don't know.
We got to give
I
Eileen
can't
some
say
time.
what her
We were
thought
supposed
was
to take
at
a
that
break,
point,
but we're gonna hold the break, because I want Eileen to give a comprehensive answer to this, because I think you should be able to defend yourself.
Sure.
They
Which
both
one?
they think that you're partisan, and and this
Where do
whole
we wanna
Catholic
stay?
thing. Let's get it out.
All right, let's talk about the partisan. I want you to give me an example, particularly under Governor Baker, how I've been partisan and how because Richard, you've talked, and I'm so flattered because you started using my lines a lot in your campaign.
I know.
Which,
you get some great lines, and I thank
because
you
I'm
for
really
them.
good at my job. I think they say the best form of flattery is when someone steals your stuff. So go for it. But give credit to where it's due. So I want an example of how I have been I'm not even sure the right word is partisan against Governor Baker because I'm a Democrat.
Yeah, Rich.
Give me an example.
Well, you went after the governor back in November of last year.
For what?
For not putting Ed O'Reilly forward.
Ed O'Reilly had an interview with the governor's office. Ed O'Reilly withdrew his application.
After the governor said that when the
Richard,
Massachusetts bar said that he was unqualified, and the governor's office said they would not be moving his nomination forward.
That I'm not sure you're right on your
I've
timeline, but you may
At
be.
least I'm following the newspaper reports,
And you know what?
They
Well,
may
you
be
can't
wrong.
trust those.
They may be wrong.
And the fact of the matter is, it really doesn't matter whether they're right or they're wrong, because I didn't go after the governor. And if you look at what I said, and I believe it was exactly this: someone has a beef with Ed O'Reilly, and it wasn't the governor. I was never going after the governor for that.
So are you saying that he was turned away because of partisanship, or what?
I think.
I mean, you said it was a travesty at the time.
Because I think
And
that
he was highly qualified.
I think when somebody, and this is part of the process that you don't know because you're not involved in it, but when someone is attacked, going through some of that process, and you can talk to other counselors. In fact, the counselor you should talk to the most about this is Counsel Casey. When there is a candidate who is going forward and then something political stops them, that political thing most times is not coming from the governor's office. It's coming from somebody else who has a beef with them. And that's fine. I have no problem with Ed O'Reilly not becoming a judge. I really don't. It makes absolutely no difference to me at all. He is a man who lives in my district, who's very well respected and revered. He's done a lot for the community.
Probably one of the best defense attorneys up there in Gloucester.
He's not just in Gloucester. He's
right.
all over the place. He's
they love
all
him
over
in Cape Ann.
Well, they love him in Cape Ann. They love him all over the North Shore. He's a great attorney.
He is.
He's a great story. I mean, this is a kid who grew up in the projects, worked in the jails, went to law school at night, was a lobsterman, made his way. Good for him.
But what's the political stop?
He didn't make it through.
That you mentioned. You said if something politically happens, what
because,
is that?
Mark,
Because
when people apply to be a judge, it's not just the paperwork goes through and they go before the joint bar and then we interview them and puff the magic dragon happens. That's not what happens behind the scenes. What happens behind the scenes is there's a ton of political lobbying going on. There's a ton of people. It is, isn't it? It's tremendously sad, and it's one of the reasons why having non-lawyers on there is really important, because I'm not playing in that sandbox. There are a lot of people who may have beefs with people.
You're not playing in the political sandbox?
I'm not playing in the sandbox of being a lawyer where I'm trying to advance my friends or not get people forward.
So Eileen, you really think this was political and that the Bar Association didn't give him unqualified because of the physical altercation he had with an assistant district attorney?
Rich, I don't know.
Or the issue with the judge in the parking lot? You don't think those had any play in...
They may have had all the play in the world. They could have had all the play in the world, and that could be absolutely why they made that decision. I don't know. And like I said, it really doesn't matter to me. What I do know is all that information had already been revealed to the governor's office. The governor's office does an extraordinary job vetting these people. They're extraordinary at it. Our Judicial Nominating Commission is an extraordinary group of volunteers who work all the time. Every Tuesday they meet, either in person or on conference calls.
They don't take a salary for that?
I don't know that the SJC gets paid, but
no.
I wouldn't know.
I mean...
But anyway, no. I don't think they do, but they may. I don't know. It doesn't matter to me whether they do or not, to be frank. What I can tell you is that he had gotten through that entire process and had already met with Lon Povich. Okay? So this was somebody, you don't get to that point unless you're one of the final 3 or 4 people.
Right.
So something else happened. I expressed my opinion. My opinion was someone had a beef with the guy, because that's what the word was. That's what everyone was saying. In the State House, at the Mass Bar, at the Joint Bar, they said, listen, we can't tell you what happened, but someone has a beef with the guy. I expressed it in the newspaper. I could be wrong. The guy didn't make it through. The guy took his application out. It's over. Doesn't really matter to me one way or another.
But by going to the press, you embarrassed Ed. You embarrassed Gloucester. Because if you'd just been quiet, it would have quietly gone away like so many other nominees.
You sound, I'm going to be really frank, you sound foolish. If you think that when that reporter called me up and repeatedly called me and asked me for a statement, that wasn't to embarrass Ed O'Reilly.
That was the result of it,
and that was not to embarrass Gloucester. And I will let you call Ed O'Reilly, and you can ask him if I embarrassed him, and you can call the mayor of Gloucester and ask them if I've ever embarrassed Gloucester.
If you'd kept quiet on that whole thing, rather than go to the press,
you should
it
not
would never
talk
been on the
about
front page of the paper.
You should not talk about things you don't know about. And let's just leave it at that. If that's your opinion, you are more than entitled to it.
We have to take a quick break, which is really sad because I'm so enjoying this. My favorite debates are the debates where I'm not even in it, where they just talk to each other, because I think it gives people at home a flavor of how these people will work with their colleagues if they win. I will say this going out. I like Ed O'Reilly. Ed O'Reilly spent a lot of money with us when he was running for sheriff, but there's no way that guy should have ever been a judge. He was so left wing. He thought he didn't just think the Constitution was a living, breathing document. I think he thought it had 25 lives. And so I'm glad he's not a judge. I'd be happy to vote for him for something else, but I'm kind of glad that happened. When we come back, I want to talk to you guys about the parole board, the role of the Governor's Council and the parole board, and whether or not the Governor's Council should be allowed to get rid of judges without political interference. Back on this, on Paying Attention, where everybody gets it, even Bob LeBlanc. Is that true? A&M Auto Body. We got our friend Angelo over there. Angelo Memolo over there. He does great work on your car. So if you got a ding in your car, somebody hit you, you got a mechanical problem, you bring it to A&M Auto. He's on South Broadway in Lawrence on Inman Street. Angelo will take care of you. So what's the address there?
341 South Broadway, Lawrence, Massachusetts.
I don't know why these guys love me so much. I really don't. But Twin Lights, let me tell you how dedicated I am to helping my sponsors. The guys at Twin Lights Security needed an extra security guy to do private investigations and to do security for a certain thing in Boston. And they posted it on my page and asked if it was okay if they could use my page to solicit hiring people. And I said, you know what? As busy as I am, these guys sponsor the show. They sponsor the Valley Patriot. They give us $1,000 for the bash. I'm going to go work for these guys. So I called up Pat McLaughlin and I said, look, you help us every single time we need something. Whenever I put out a call, you're there. If you need an extra person and you're short, I'll take the night off and I'll come work for you. And so I have been. I've been doing some work for them because they're helping us. And so there's no reason why I shouldn't be able to find a way to help them in the meantime. So if you need security or if you're getting divorced and you need a private investigator, if you have a business and you need a private investigator or security, you want to call Twin Lights Security. They're based out of Gloucester, but they're very local. If while I'm driving around Lawrence, I get shot and killed, make sure you get my body to Perez Funeral Home because we do business with the people who do business with us. And he's on South Broadway where it's the old Scott Funeral Home. If you're an old-time Lawrence resident, it's the old Scott Funeral Home on South Broadway. Perez Funeral Home at 298 South Broadway in Lawrence. They do crematory services. They do all the stuff that they're supposed to do, right? And Mike's a big fan of the show. He followed us when we go live. He's an advertiser now in the print edition of the paper, and he's now sponsoring this program. Perez Funeral Home and Crematory Services, 298 South Broadway in Lawrence. We appreciate him. Franklin Veloz from Veloz Auto Group. He specializes in people that have maybe bad credit, no credit. Maybe you haven't had a job for a long period of time, so you don't think that maybe you qualify for a car loan. Usually, they want you to have a job for a year or more. He specializes in getting people who have bad credit or no credit or maybe spotty credit, getting them into a used car. He used to work for Charlie Dare's Commonwealth Motors for a long, long time, so he knows his stuff. I think he was the credit manager over there or something. So he knows what he's doing, and he follows us live, too. I really appreciate that he does. Every time I see him pop on, I'm very excited about it. And I was there yesterday to deliver his newspaper, and he said he's already had customers come in from us talking about him on this show. So we appreciate Veloz Auto Group. Go see Franklin. He's at 17 Mass Ave. It's right at the very beginning of Mass Ave on the Lawrence-North Andover line. Alrighty. No Paul today. And by the way, we hate Charlie Dare. I'm going to have to recut that commercial. Don't ever buy a car from that guy. Trust me when I tell you. Don't ever buy a car from that guy. Don't do it. Trust me.
And this is one of your advertisers, Tom?
No, he's not an advertiser.
Oh.
No, the Veloz Auto Group, he used to work for Charlie Dare. And for some reason, I worked that into the commercial. And then just realized I gave the likes of Charlie Dare free airtime. So I was like, what did I do that for? So we are having a Governor's Council debate. The Governor's Council, for those of you who don't know, real quick, it's an elected body where when the governor appoints judges, they have to get confirmed. It's kind of like when the city council has to confirm like a police chief or a fire chief at your local level. And so they have to kind of interview the guy publicly. It's going to be a public hearing. And sometimes you have people who just hate the guy that was nominated. We saw this with Sal Tabit. Somebody just hated Sal and started calling governance counselors and saying, he kicks puppies, he's a bad guy, he steals money out of the church poor box, he's awful.
They actually did accuse him of stealing money.
Did they really?
Yeah.
I mean, that's just it was just ridiculous. But so it's kind of like when the Kavanaugh hearing was brought up by Rich Baker earlier, it can sometimes degenerate into that. And so it's important who it is that we put on these boards that are going to be overseeing the appointment of judges. But you guys, I would like you to talk about some of the other things that the Governance Council does, because if one of you is obviously going to win, and you're going to be sitting there, and one of them has been a very big pet peeve of mine. We know that Dominic Sinelli was given 3 life sentences by a liberal Mike Dukakis judge. 3 life sentences. It just never happens with a liberal judge like that. And yet, even though this liberal judge gave Dominic Sinelli 3 life sentences because he was so dangerous, they wanted to make sure he never gets out, the parole board decided to let him out anyway because he got his GED and he was saying nice things to the guards, and he was taking Toastmaster classes, and they went, yep, he's ready for society. They let him out, and 2 days later, he murdered Woburn police officer Jack McGuire.
Sure did.
And since then, we heard all kinds of things about parole reform and how they're going to change the way things happen. I haven't seen one damn change since. So what I want all 3 of you to talk about, and I don't care who goes first, is the role of the Governor's Council in appointing people on the parole board, and what can the Governor's Council do when the parole board does something so out of control, like what they did with Sinelli, to either punish them or remove them from the parole board. And I'll let whoever wants to jump in first.
Well, the biggest part is you need a parole board that has wisdom, people that have that can look at people and make a judgment based on what the inmate has done, what their actions are in jail, and it's not an exact science, and there's going to be some mistakes there. But you want to make sure that they're not always making mistakes. I think that's the biggest problem I have with Judge Feely is it's not one mistake or 2 mistakes, but there's maybe 10 or 15 mistakes if you start chasing down all of the cases of people that he's let off. So you just need people on the parole board that have wisdom to get it right most of the time.
There is something to the fact that
just pull us a little closer.
Sure, sorry. So there is something to the fact that there's just so many cases that in any pool of cases, you have 10,000 people put onto parole, somebody's going to screw it up, right? Somebody's going to do something bad, and then that's going to become the highlight of the actions of the parole board. So, making sure you have the qualified people on the parole board is an important, very important thing. I think if you looked at the makeup of the parole board previously, maybe 20 years ago, it was much more law enforcement focused, or people that were on it were more from the law enforcement side of things. And then more recently, because of the push towards rehabilitation of people that are in prisons, there's been more people brought on that don't have that kind of background. And so they're not focused on keeping people and punishing people. They're focused on releasing people, rehabbing people and policing people. And there's certain people that, meet the proper criteria for that. But I think that the focus on should be on who is the danger to society, who's violent, who has that history. And those people shouldn't get that consideration. They shouldn't receive that kind of deference. Should those
parole board members been thrown off the parole board after they let Sinelli out? This guy he was so dangerous that a liberal judge gave him 3 life sentences. And I read the report. I read the parole report. They talked about these ridiculous things that I see liberals talk about all the time. The causative factors that made him commit crimes. There's no factor that made him commit a crime. And if you've got that attitude, you shouldn't even be on a parole board.
I mean, if you end up,
okay, what your resume says.
Let's say you're raised in a way that creates a monster, right? Well, do we give that monster the benefit of the doubt because they say, oh, well, his parents, raised him that way and treated him very badly? No, we have to deal with him as he is, as a person right now. And the rehabilitation can happen, but it better be, very demonstrative that this person has changed their life around and that they're not a loose fuse. Another issue with a lot of that is mental rehabilitation for people that have mental issues, disabilities. Those people, a lot of those end up in the system, and they need to be dealt with, and those things need to be taken into consideration. So people who can assess the mental state of individuals, have the medical education training, they need to be there as well, influencing that decision.
Eileen, you're there now. I'm sure it disgusted you as it disgusted me when Sinelli was let out and he murdered a police officer. And then all we heard for the next year was that there was going to be parole reform and we were going to change things, that this never happened again. None of that happened. We're right back where we were.
Well, some things did happen. And I'm so glad you asked this question, because I always say parole is the stepchild of the criminal justice system, because it doesn't get a lot of attention sometimes. And so, and I was not there when that whole thing happened. I wasn't on the council. Mm-hmm. So I can't speak to who was on the board or whatever. I do know that they were all, I think they all voluntarily resigned, but they was pretty much dismissed. And there's some legal questions of how that really should have gone down or could have gone down.
I think the litigation's still pending.
And it very well could be. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. After that happened, Tom, Massachusetts basically, all paroles came to a grinding halt for quite a few months. Between 3 to 6 months, maybe more than that. No one was getting paroled at all. And
I like that.
What they did is they brought in a new board with some of the things that Marc just referred to, which is important, and tried to get a different balance. Like we have a forensic psychologist there, we have addiction experts, we have people we have a victims advocate. Because at the end of the day, the most important issue is public safety.
Right.
Now, Officer McGuire...
It doesn't seem like the parole board gives two craps about public safety.
Well,
seems they care more about getting the number of people out of prison that they can.
But let me explain something to you that people don't know, and this is really, really important. So what they did is Massachusetts was not following what's considered the national model, which is a step-down program, which is some of the stuff that Marc alluded to, even if he didn't know that's what it was.
He's a smart guy, that Marc.
He's very smart. He lives in Boxford.
I've been told.
So the step-down program is something that Sinelli never went through. And it's, people are all going to point fingers, whatever. Again, you're going to get people out there that have gone through all the programs in the world and look terrific, and they're still going to screw up and do terrible things when they get out. That's just how it is. But we did implement a step-down program. During the Sinelli era, people on the parole board, if they had a hearing, it was like a 1 or 2 page report they would write, which was like nothing. Mm-hmm. There's nothing in it. And so in the reform, what happened was there were like papers being written, details about these people, about their crimes, about have they really worked to become rehabilitated, have they taken programs that they said they took or they wanted to take or they've been recommended to take. Because there are folks in jail, and I'll give you an example of somebody pretty soon, who keep applying for parole but refuse to do the program because they're innocent.
Right.
And as you know, my brother-in-law was chief of police in Alexandria, Virginia, and that's a big city. A lot of those Al-Qaeda and underwear bombers and everyone else, they're in his jail. Mm-hmm. When the shooting happened outside, outside Alexandria, the schools, that's where my family lives.
Right.
My sister teaches at that school. When police officers get attacked, that's my family. Mm-hmm. That's a very personal thing for me. So I don't take that lightly. I don't take public safety lightly. Probably 80% of the folks in jail have mental health issues and or drug issues. So getting into these step-down programs and really doing the program matters. Sinelli, I've been told, when he got out of jail, literally couldn't function. Because he'd been in jail for so long, he had no ability to function at all. I mean, they said he'd go to a restaurant and he'd throw silverware away because that's what you did in the jail. You just turned the whole tray in. We were doing a pretty good job of that. In the way that public safety ties into parole is that people that deserve parole and can prove that they should be paroled, we want to parole. We want to parole them because if they're paroled, we can track them outside. They have to report in. They have to tell us what they're doing. There's disciplines that they have to hit. There are benchmarks they have to hit. What has happened and what is happening right now, and this is catastrophic, and it's happening more in this administration than it's ever happened before, they're serving out their sentences. And if you serve your full sentence, you walk out of there, and we have no control over what you do. So...
And you didn't learn anything while you were in there.
You
come out without those programs or anything like that. And
You want to phase
nobody put out the fuse.
No, exactly. And that's a really big problem. I mean, listen, and you and I have had this conversation. There are people that belong in jail and never should see the light of day again.
I agree with that.
I mean, that's just the truth.
Like all of them.
We've got...
Yeah, that's why I'm not on the governor's council, by the way.
That's why you're not on the pro board.
Right. Denied.
Really.
Well, I mean, certainly if you think there's a trend in, this that the parole board is too soft in their decision making, then you need to have people on the parole board who understand that they shouldn't be looking at it as like our role here is just to get as many people back out as we can. What our role is to protect society from people who have demonstrated that they don't cooperate in society and that they do things that harm other people in society.
Rich, you haven't had a lot of time on this. The parole board, should we be able to fire parole board members when they make ridiculous decisions like in Sinelli? And what kind of restrictions should we have on this ridiculous parole board that we have right now?
Well, that's a law decision. That's something that the legislature should change. If you want the parole board to serve for a certain amount of time, then go to the legislature and get that changed. That's not something the Governor's Council would do. Our job is just to make sure we get the best parole board members on the parole board.
So as a Governor's Council, say you win and you're on the Governor's Council, and a proposal comes up to allow the Governor's Council to fire parole board members. Would you favor that? Would you not favor that?
I'd say that's outside of my purview. I'll defer to the legislators on that.
I'd be much more comfortable with it for parole board members, since we have the final say on their appointment. With judges, there's processes in place in order to ensure that judges are not part of or not supposed to be part of the political influence or the political process.
You want the judicial independence.
You want them to be independent. I do think, though, with these essentially lifetime appointments that we have, they're not lifetime, but they might as well be. Judges now are feeling, more free to be partisan or make decisions based on their own feelings or personal opinions rather than the actual law. And they have to embed it in law. But I think that they, like some of the situations with Feely, not all of them, but some of them, he's just making decisions from the hip because I
told you he's in love.
Because he has a different.
He's a Republican,
He is he just has a different perspective on his role, and so I do propose as part of what my platform is that we do change the rules so that the judges have to appear every so many years, maybe 10 years, before the board again, before the council again.
Have them be reappointed.
And say,
right.
Are you doing what you're supposed to be doing? Or, allow the community to give testimony again and hear from them. Now, I know there is the Judicial Review Commission.
It's a joke, though. We all know that.
But that
they got rid of one. They got rid of Estes.
But that's not a proactive
he retired.
review.
He was forced out.
That review only happens if somebody raises an issue and says and brings the claim forward. I think that there should be a periodic review as well of anybody. So that.
What do you think, Eileen? Do you agree with that?
I've been a big advocate of that.
Of having them come back for review.
Come back for review. In that we've also talked to Senator Brownsberger and put that in the judicial reform bill.
Okay.
Of doing that.
Ed, can we go like 5 minutes over? Is that possible? Ed Sullivan, the voice of purgatory.
I am going to grant you 5 minutes.
Excellent.
Exactly 5.
All right. So I want to wrap up because, believe it or not, we're at the end of this debate, which is amazing because we obviously did a pretty good job since it went so fast. Would you guys agree? It's almost the same question with the parole board. Would you guys agree that if a judge is doing a really bad job, that the Governor's Council should be able to call him back, not like in a 10-year review like you said, it's a great idea, but on top of that, someone does something really egregious like Feely, should the Governor's Council be able to call him back before them and say, hey, wait a minute, what the hell is this?
We can, but it's got to be the governor that brings it to us. If the governor says Judge Feely needs to be removed, he brings it to the Governor's Council, and the Governor's Council with an affirmative vote and the governor go to the joint session of the House and Legislature, and they get rid of the judge.
Has that ever happened?
Not in my tenure. It hasn't.
So I guess maybe the question is, should the Governor's Council be able to do it autonomously without?
Well, I think that the role established in the Constitution for the Governor's Council is that we're supposed to provide consent and advice and consent,
Right.
and so the Governor's Council should take an active role in influencing the decision of the governor on whether or not this person needs to. And I mean, they could have their own hearing. They could bring people forward. They could listen to what the evidence is on what the issue was, and then provide advice. Actually, provide advice to the governor on moving forward on whether or not to recall this judge or not.
All right. Unless anybody else wants in on that question, I'm going to give each of you a minute to.
I
Go ahead.
do want to say something on that because when all this happened with Judge Feely, there were a whole bunch of things that happened that people don't know about, and part of that was particularly because he sits in my district, at least he does right now. We were talking on a regular basis to his superiors, and meeting on the phone and in person with the Chief Justice of that court, and going to the court, in talking to people. The unfortunate part of what happened with that, aside from what you might feel of whatever his thought process was, which I don't think any of us sitting here can discern, people in the court were being threatened. They felt unsafe going to work. People were threatening him, his life, his family, sending him hate mail at his house, going to his house. That is not how a civil society behaves. If you have a beef with somebody, we have processes. And go through those processes. Talk to your state representative. Call for a constitutional convention if you want some of this stuff changed. But the way that people behaved was abhorrent and dangerous. And it made the employees of that court so uncomfortable and so afraid. It was unbelievable. I can't tell you how many days I spent talking to people, and people that were calling me saying, can you help us? Can you send more protection? We don't feel safe even walking to our cars. So it's, people need to think twice about their actions. You might have a beef with a particular person. Think about how it plays out.
There's a lot of people with mental issues in society that may not actually already be in jail yet, but those are the ones that are on the fringe that are causing all these problems.
Absolutely, and there's a lot of people out there like that, and it's just something folks need to think about. Judge Feely, I'm sure the governor's staff were going through the processes which they have. I know the Chief Justice was having meetings with him. I don't, like I said, I can't discern why he said what he said or did what he did. I'm not even going to speculate on it. But that is what it is. Tom, I know you're trying to wrap us up again.
Yeah, I just want to give each of you a minute to remind people who you are, why they should vote for you for Governor's Council. It's coming up. I think it's one of the most important things on the ballot, even though it's way down at the bottom.
So I'm Rich Baker, running for Governor's Council, and I'm asking for your vote to make sure that we have fair judges on the bench in Massachusetts. It's one of the most important positions that we vote on November 6th, and we don't elect judges. You elect counselors to represent you, and I'm the best person on the ballot to make sure we get the best judges in Massachusetts.
Go ahead, Eileen.
Sure. My name's Eileen Duff. I'm running for re-election to the Governor's Council. I've been serving for a few years now. I have a reputation of fairness, even-handedness, and I would dare say impartiality, as you talked about with some of the hearings, which we didn't go in detail with. But also, one of the things I've brought to the council, which we haven't had in our district before, is some transparency. I've actually done public information hearings in the district. And I've done them in Lawrence, I've done them in Salem, I've done them in Gloucester. We're trying to do them in Lowell. We've tried to do them in Haverhill. I don't get that many appointments in this district. In the last 2 years, there's been 10 judges appointed in this district, so I don't have as many opportunities. The Baker administration has moved things along very, very quickly. And so we need to have time to set up those hearings, which I haven't always had. However, what I've been able to do is bring the process of the Governor's Council into the community, so people in the community can actually see what happens and participate in it. It's never been done before. I'm very proud that I've done it. It's had great success. The feedback on it is tremendous. Not everyone can get into Boston on a Wednesday to sit in a hearing that can go to 8 o'clock at night at times. So I think it's a really great thing, and I've got a proven track record, and I'll put it up against anybody anytime. So, as I always say, get off your duff and vote.
Yes, Mark, your final word.
So I'm Marc Mercier. I'm the third-party candidate running for this position as a Libertarian. I'm also the most qualified person for this job. I've spent 16 years as a litigation consultant with some of the top law firms in Boston, in the area. I have a degree from Suffolk Law. I previously worked in law enforcement. I have the right perspective for this office and the right background and education. As a third-party person, I will be independent no matter who the governor is or no matter who the other people on the council are. Right now it's 7 Democrats and 1 Republican, so it's pretty slanted, perspective-wise, philosophically. So, I think those are 2 valuable things that people could consider when determining who they should vote for. And then additionally, I'm the only counselor of any counselor running, not just in this district, but of any district that's taken a pledge to do the job without taking a salary. I don't think either of the people here are willing to take that pledge.
I wouldn't work for free.
Well, I mean, a lot of people do. The nominating, the Joint Bar Commission, they do all of the background screening and all the work, all the legwork to get candidates to come forward and get presented to the governor. They all do it for free. And in my town, in any of the towns around here, there's lots of people involved in local government that do it for free. I think it's an honor and a privilege to be able to sit in this position, and I think that people should do it for the privilege of doing it and for the honor of doing it.
Well, if they could afford it, I couldn't afford it. I would never do it.
That's my problem.
I'd love to do it. But you wanted to say just one more thing?
I want to say one thing. Both of these fellows keep talking about the partisanship. For the record, not one of Governor Baker's nominations has been voted down. Not one.
Yep.
He has every single person.
And you're a Democrat.
And I'm a Democrat.
All right,
and there's only ever been one
He
tie.
can only nominate ones that passed a crew of 7 Democrats. I mean, if you have 7 Democrats, who are you going to nominate?
Exactly.
Eileen Duff, Rich Baker, Marc Mercier, thank you so much for coming into paying attention.
Thank you, Tommy.
Good luck at Election Day. Please let us know on Election Night how you do. It's going to be a tough race to track because it's Essex County. So all of you guys, if you could just email me your results when you get them, that'd be really helpful. We might even be here live talking about it live on the show. Thank you to all of our sponsors. Thank you, Rich Russell. Thank you to Tom Troy from Political TNT here on Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. Well, enjoy that you guys have sitting in the audience and watching. Melvin Taylor says go home, as you can tell. So go home already. And as our good friend Ronnie Ford would say, we wish you enough.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks.
The views and opinions expressed by the hosts, guests, or callers of this program do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, the United Podcast Network, its partners, or affiliates.